Hello friends. In this episode of learning the methods and techniques of film editing, we will talk about the different shots that the editor uses while telling a story. He uses a number of shots like an establishing shots, master shot, and uses narrativization techniques like flashbacks, flash forwards, and uses shots like inserts, etc. The experience of watching a cinema is often very similar to that of a theater performance. The only difference is, in this case, the audience is invisible and he can move into the scene where the actors are performing. He can get close to the characters, he can even be placed at a point where he can see the entire scene together. To establish a scene, like a theater backdrop or the mise-en-scene that is present in the scene, what we need is called an establishing shot. When the theater screens open, what we see is the set of characters and the props, costumes, everything that is placed on the stage. When we see all these things together, we call this an establishing shot. The purpose of using an establishing shot is to relate the characters with space and time. We get a clue where the characters are placed and what is the time when these actions are happening. Once the shots are established, that is, once the scene is established and the characters are placed within a particular time and space, we can move into the scene, we can get closer to the characters according to dramatic needs. In an example from a film called Cinema Paradiso, we will see there is a scene of a school. The shot of the school from a very wide angle is used to establish the school, and the characters, who are students in this case, are entering the building. As the scene progresses, we see a smaller group who are still entering the school. And in the third shot, we see the character whom we want to see in the film, who is the protagonist in the film. And the narrative continues forward. In this case, we establish the school first, then we establish a smaller section, and then we get into the details of the scene.
A tomate può fottere, non a mia! Prenditi un pezzo di carta e vai a fare un carabiniere! Disgraziato! Certo sei!
Another example can be cited from the same film where we have a town square during the night. The space is established as well as the time with the light and all these things. The scene is established and then we move into the details of what is happening within the scene. These shots are called establishing shots.
Disgraziato. Magari vuoi sempre con me ce l'ha.
Bella pellicola. Un picciotto travagliava troppo buono. Peccato che era sfortunato.
Ma io che ci fece fare da accattare la barca?
Minchia! Non dura niente, capiste?
Dunque, picciotto, per capirci, qua si travaglia dall'alba al tramonto.
The concept of establishing shots has been used by many directors in a different way. From the same film, I can give you an example where the angry priest rings the handbell and it immediately cuts to the town bell. The town bell cannot be considered as an establishing shot, but as the scene progresses or as the shot progresses, we see an overview of the town from the perspective of the town bell. This again becomes an establishing shot. But when the shot began, you can't call this an establishing shot. Many film directors have used the concept of establishing a scene with sound. Let me give you an example. We enter a school scene, but not with a wide shot. We start with a schoolboy writing something on a piece of paper. The next shot, we see 2-3 students writing on a piece of paper. And maybe the third or the fourth shot actually establishes a classroom with a teacher teaching something to the students. Here, the establishing shot is not in terms of images, but in terms of sound, because from the first shot, we have the school ambience coming in. We have sounds of the teacher who is trying to teach the students. These sounds all put together establishes that this is a new scene, and this is probably the scene of a school. Experiments have been done in many films where establishment has been done with sound, with effects, etc. The next kind of shot that we are going to discuss is called a master shot. A master shot is essentially not an establishing shot. Say, for example, we have a scene within a room and there are 2-3 people talking to each other. The first take that the director will try to take is called a master shot, which is a wide shot where we see all the characters and their relative positions. Now the actors will act out whatever is there in the scene. They react, they stand up, they talk to each other, and all these things are happening on the master shot. This is more or less like watching theater, where the audience is placed at a point where he can see. He can actually pick and choose what to see. He can look at character A, he can also look at character B. He can also look at character C, who is not at all participating in this entire conversation. After this master shot is taken, the director takes closer shots where he thinks the dramatic emphasis needs to be established. Let us see an example from a film. Here we see a boy who is having dinner with 2 kids, a character, a male character, and a female character who joins the scene. In this particular case, we will see that the director has taken a master shot. In the master shots, everything is happening at the same time. That is, the boy is singing a song and the lady joins in. The father is reacting, the boys who are there are dancing. All these things are happening. As an audience, I don't know what is happening actually with the character. And as I am trying to build the narrative, it's not possible for me to really see what is happening with the characters. Now, if we see the edit, we will notice that the director has tried to emphasize on things that are required for the narrative. Here, we cut close to the boy who is singing. We have reaction shots from the father character. We have reaction shot from the lady character also. We also have another character coming in. The other 2 characters who are there in the scene are not saying anything. So, on the master shot, it was not possible for the audience to know that there is something happening between these 2 characters. It's only when the reaction shots are placed in a particular order, at the particular point, then only the audience can understand there is a relationship that is developing between these characters. And the other character who joins in is not really liking it. These are all based on expressions. These kind of narrative styles are only established in cinema through inserts, reaction shots, etc., which is not possible to portray on a master shot. From an example which I already mentioned earlier, from the film called Rules of the Game by Jean Renoir, we see an entire action sequence happening on a wide shot, which can be called a master shot. In this case, the audience is free to choose where to look at. Should they look towards group number 1 or should they look towards group number 2? This option is open to the audience. This works in this film because the director has played with the mise-en-scène and the layering of characters. In other examples, like a film called 10 by Abbas Kiarostami, the entire film is a collection of 10 master shots, and it's a 1.5 hour film. The master shots are only used because the director wanted to intensify the master shot and the dialogue sequence that is happening within that car. So there are exceptions to the rule, but the general rule is you establish something with a master shot and get closer. In certain cases, you may need to come back to your master shots. Let me give you another example where 2-3 people are talking to each other and the conversation is really intense. During the conversation, it so happens that the 3 or 4 people who are sitting needs to applaud. Maybe that is the point where the editor may choose to come back to the master shot again. This kind of coming back happens with master shots and not with establishing shots. So establishing shots only establish the scene, but master shots establishes a scene and often is used to come back to a wider shot when necessary. As the film editor builds up the story with different kinds of shots, he may need something called an insert. As the name suggests, an insert is a shot that is placed or inserted within a sequence. In the film High Noon, we have seen the use of inserts quite often. The clock or the time in the film is very important. The clock has been used as an insert in a number of cases in this particular film. Let me give you 2-3 kinds of examples. In this particular example, a conversation develops which finally leads the main lead or the protagonist to look at the clock. The clock was not placed within the master shot, but it is used as an insert. With the island match and everything, we are convinced that the clock is there and it's only there within the scene. In another example from the same film, we'll see that the clock is there in the master shot. Since the clock is there in the master shot and the characters are also looking at the clock, the director preferred not using the insert of the clock because it's already visible. In another example, we'll see that the character looks at the clock. Here, in the master shot, the clock was visible, but the director preferred to use an insert of the clock, which is a closer shot of the clock, to emphasize on the time. Maybe the size of the clock was not big enough in the master shot, and so he preferred to cut into the closer shot of the clock. Inserts can also be used as transition. In another example from the same film, we see that a person, after having a dialogue with character B in a scene, looks at the clock. The next shot that comes after the clock insert is a lady who is looking at the clock. This shot of the clock becomes an insert for both the scenes. In scene 1, the man looks at the clock, and in scene 2, the woman is looking at the clock. We can infer that the woman is looking at the clock from the eyeline match. Here, the insert is used as a transition between the two scenes. It is quite cleverly used in this particular film. If we look at this example from another film where a person who is a traveler is walking across the desert, an insert of an eagle is used. This shot does not fit into the master shot. This shot is also not really relevant as far as the narrative is concerned. But to build the space, to build the essence of the film, the shot of the eagle has been used as an insert. As we were talking about inserts, we mean that the shot or the element that is shown as an insert is something within the scene. That is, if I am talking about a scene within a room, the element like a clock, like a flower vase or anything can be used as an insert, which would mean that it is within that scene or within that room. Unlike an insert, a cutaway is something that does not belong to that particular space, but is related somehow in terms of space and time. Let's see an example from the film Godfather. Here we have a scene where Godfather is talking to his people inside a room. Within that scene, a shot of the party that is happening somewhere else is used, where the cake is being brought. The party shot becomes a cutaway shot. When we come back to the scene continues, and obviously there is a time lapse in between. Cutaways are often used as a marker for time or a marker for space. When within a scene which is happening say around afternoon, we use the shot of sunset. When we come back to the scene, obviously it would mean that it's already evening. So the shot of the sunset is not only used as a time-lapse shot, but is also used as a cutaway. That is, it acts as a pillow shot. A pillow shot is a shot which acts as a pillow between two scenes. If we have a lot of dialogues in the first section of the scene, we use pillow shots like this, like a sunset, and we get into the next part of the scene. It reduces the pace of the edit and starts the scene afresh. Film editing occurs at two levels. Whatever we were discussing till this point was the micro level of film editing, where we try to match action, where we try to place shots which would make the scene look beautiful and interesting. At the macro level, we do structuring. That is, when the scenes are ready, we play around with the position of the scenes with respect to the entire film. By doing this, a simple narrative can be told in a different way. If the narrative goes back in time, we call this a flashback. When a person narrates incidents from his memories and we actually go into the past, we would say that it's a flashback sequence. When a story is told in a linear fashion, the story may often be uninteresting. In certain cases, it may be boring for the audience. But the same story, if told in a non-linear fashion, That is, we talk about the present, we go to the past, come back to the present, and then again go to the past, and so on. The story may be much more interesting. We have seen this happen in films like Cinema Paradiso, in films like Milos Forman's Amadeus. In this particular example from Milos Forman's Amadeus, we see Salieri, who used to be the court composer, starts narrating the story of Mozart and his past. While he is narrating the story, the filmmaker goes into sequences which are from his past. This is a typical example of a flashback. The idea of flashback is so deeply established in the audience's mind that it becomes quite easy for anybody to understand that by using flashes or dissolves, if we suddenly show a sequence, it generally means that the person has been through this experience much before the present time. Let's get an example from the film Run Lola Run. In this film, as the girl collides with a character while she was running, the director suddenly uses a sequence of still frames with flashes, where we see the character who actually collides with our character or the girl in different situations. This can be interpreted as a flashback. That is, we get into the story in a very subtle manner of the boy who collided with the girl. This is a very interesting use of the flashback technique. Flashbacks can be a sequence, can be a series of sequences like from films Cinema Paradiso or even Amadeus. It can also be a single shot. Let's take this example from the film. Here, what we see is a man who is staring at the water suddenly gets a flash from his memory. The director uses a single shot of some incident from his past, and in the next shot he comes back to the present time. So here the flashback actually is a single shot. So using flashbacks all depends on the kind of narrative that you are trying to say or portray. The style of telling a story much ahead of the present time is called a flash-forward sequence. When the film is established to be narrating a story from a particular time, something might happen that the character is imagining something, or the narrative is suggesting certain culmination to the narrative much before the present time, is called flash forward treatment or flash forward sequences. In examples where we skip time or jump time, like the example of a person leaving house, taking a bus ride and reaching office, can be told in 30 seconds. But this is not flash forward because we are not coming back to the present time. That is, we are not coming back to the house sequence, for example. We have often seen sequences where a child grows up maybe in 30 seconds. We see his childhood, we see the days of his college life, and we see him as a mature man going to office. This is also not flash forward. This will only qualify to be a flash forward sequence when we come back to his childhood again and start narrating the story. In Run Lola Run, we also have an example of a flash forward sequence. In the last part of the narrative, where an ambulance hits the glass being carried by 2-3 people, is actually a flash forward sequence, because that is an imagination of the girl which never happened. As the narrative progressed, we see the girl with the ambulance where the glass and the ambulance did not collide at all. So the collision sequence or the accident sequence can be termed as a flash forward sequence. With these tools in hand, the editor can easily make a simple story interesting by saying stories in a non-linear fashion. In the coming episode, we will see how sequences can be structured in a way so that there are 2-3 things happening at the same time. The feeling is aroused. Parallel cutting, intercutting are also methods of narrativization or methods of telling a story. We'll discuss about these things in the next episode.